Welcome to a special virtual issue of Anarchist Developments in Cultural Studies, where dozens of prominent anarchist scholars were brought together to explore or attempt to answer the question, what is anarchist studies? Now, the medium is a self-shot video using a cellular phone or a laptop, tablet, or a home computer. They have 3 to 10 minutes to answer the question. And to speak in any way, I mean, the authors were given absolute freedom to answer the question in any way they feel suitable outside of these initial guidelines. So I asked the question, what is anarchist studies? Because I personally want to ensure that it remains a question, right? So the answer, at least it seems to me, is that anarchist studies is not just about producing knowledge about anarchism or about producing knowledge that's relevant to anarchists and these sorts of things. I think it's also, or as Sandra Jeppesen pointed out in one of our previous issues, that anarchist cultural production is, and perhaps ought to, involve a certain consistency of values in the form or the style of scholarship, as well as in the content or knowledge of scholarship. So, to begin with, the question could be, what is anarchist development in cultural studies? Already, I somewhat regret the framing of the journal, and in recent times, I've just been referring to it as ADCS, so that it becomes more of something like a symbol rather than a, people have a certain conception of what cultural studies is, and I want to disrupt that conception, because I want the journal to be very broad-based and to be much more inclusive than a sort of disciplinary or even interdisciplinary focus. So why did the journal begin? The journal began because I was beginning my master's degree in sociology, and I was interested in anarchist studies, and I couldn't afford to buy any of the articles that seemed to be really in vogue within the anarchist studies milieu. So I said, okay, if I can't afford to buy these articles, I'm going to create a venue so that I can personally, have all the articles that I want, and invite authors that I was really interested in reading to contribute articles. And so beginning Anarchist Studies and Anarchist Developments in Cultural Studies journal was absolutely selfish. I did it because I could not afford, and I didn't have access to the resources. And so out of a selfish motive, who knew that there could be some selflessness in it as well, and because I've received many comments from scholars who were in similar situations, and they were thankful that they could access material from some of the most prominent anarchist scholars writing today. But also, I wasn't just interested in reading reports on anarchism, scholarly reports on anarchism. I also wanted, or I had a sense that anarchist scholarship ought to provoke people, and not only provoke, but touch people, actually reach out and change people. And so the emphasis was on change for me, and not just on knowledge or scholarly contributions to knowledge. So this, I thought, required a certain experimentation. But, for me, experimentation is not good enough. There's always another step that comes along with experimentation. We have to sustain, I believe, a space for an encounter between like minds and sensibilities. Sustain a space where experimentation can happen. I don't want experimentation to be a transient thing, right? And so I don't want ADCS to be something that falls out of fashion. I want it to always exist. And I want it to foster a space for experimentation and for the realization of what was good within some of these experimentations. Sure, there's going to be, because of the emphasis on experimentation, there's going to be some things that perhaps are absolute nonsense that slips through, and that's okay for me, right? I think that's the risk of opening up a space like this. But the important point for me then is really to sustain, to offer a space where people can experiment, but also go beyond that experimentation and see it through to something positive and concrete in the world. So I think that all of this implies that anarchist scholarship is not just what we read. It's more than what we read. You know, it's more than just what we're reading through our eyes and with our minds. It's also something that we hear, something that we feel, something that affects us, and it opens up. It's more than just one sense, I guess, is what I'm saying. So I began the journal with Saria Evren because I personally believe that anarchist studies ought not to embrace just the hegemony of the written word, right? It should embrace much more than this. This is why we have media, videos, and sounds, and images. I want it to include all of these things. And so it's not just the study of anarchism, and that's the important point for me. So our mandate as a journal was, and it continues to be, to encourage investigations into anarchist thought and practice, whether that be from an anarchist standpoint or from a non-anarchist standpoint. But it's also to encourage investigations into non-anarchist thought and practice, perhaps from the standpoint of anarchist thought. So ADCS is not just an anarchist journal about anarchism. It's also a space which embraces anarchism as not just knowledge or content and teaching, but also as a style, a sensibility, or a spirit. So finally, that brings me to the question, what is anarchist studies? For me, I think there's two versions. The first, anarchist studies is the academization of anarchism. It is anarchism reduced to the pursuit of knowledge. I think we can just sort of, philosophically, we can examine this in the way that Lacan reinterpreted Hegel. Right? The slave works to give knowledge to the master. Right? And this is what Lacan problematically referred to as university discourse. This is the problematic aspect of anarchist studies for me. The second, anarchist studies is the space for thinking anarchists. So Alan Badiou claims that love must be constructed point by point. So here I think we have a crucial concept that we can borrow from Badiou. A point within anarchist studies is a point-by-point movement toward a new world. Right? So a point is established when anarchists make a sort of decision to take anarchism seriously, to take something within their experimentation seriously, and not just the experiment itself. It's to pursue something that they discovered through their experimentation with absolute conviction and fidelity, always and forever to eternity, toward that horizon, which is the new world. So a point ensures that the new world does not just remain within our hearts, right? As anarchists, we have this phrase that we often repeat, and we repeat it with more conviction, I think, than it deserves, that anarchism is only a beginning. A point ensures that the new world is, we don't just begin at building a new world, but that we actually see it through, and we construct that new world. So not only does the new world exist within our hearts, but through a point-by-point movement, it also can exist outside of our hearts in the real world as an overcoming, or not just a destruction, but an overcoming, a transformation of the prevailing arrangement of the order of the world in which we live. So anarchist studies then, for me, is a point toward the new world. And it's a point toward the new world precisely because of the space that we've constructed for thinking and experimenting with what that new world might actually be. So I invite you to take a look at the videos listed below. Don't think of them as scholarly contributions. These are spontaneous discussions by anarchists that most of us have been reading and citing in our work, or just finding inspiration from. And that's really all we're trying to do with this issue. Thank you.